The clink of glass sounded like thunder in that ballroom. Gold chandeliers shimmered above us, laughter hung in the air, and the string quartet played some soft love song I'd heard at too many weddings to count. My son looked so handsome standing beside his new wife, eyes bright, heart pure. For a moment everything was perfect, until my husband stood up. He rose slowly, deliberate, with that same self-satisfied smirk he'd been wearing for months. His navy suit fit him too well for a man who used to forget to iron his shirts. When he cleared his throat, the music faded, and all those smiling faces turned toward him. I already knew he wasn't the kind of man who stood without a reason. "To new beginnings," he said, raising his champagne flute high. Then, after the slightest pause that felt like a dagger, he added, "Without her." At first, the words didn't register. They floated in the air like smoke from a candle. But then I saw where his eyes landed, on me, and across from me, her, his mistress, sat in a pale gold dress that shimmered like something sinful. She looked right at me and smiled, that smug, polished, rehearsed smile of a woman who thought she'd won. The room went silent. You could hear the silverware hit the plates. My son froze, his face twisting in confusion, while his bride tried to pretend she hadn't heard a thing. And me? I just breathed. Slow, controlled. I'd spent too many years letting that man rattle me. Not tonight, not when I'd already made my peace with what was coming. So I smiled back. It wasn't the smile of a broken woman or a bitter wife. It was the smile of a woman who knew something nobody else did. I reached into my clutch, black satin, small enough to hold only what mattered, and slid an ivory envelope across the table toward him. My hand was steady, my nails freshly painted a shade called Resurrection Red. Fitting, don't you think? He blinked, that smirk faltering for the first time all evening. He didn't touch it right away. He looked around, suddenly aware of the eyes watching him. Then he forced a laugh, loud and hollow, pretending the moment wasn't dripping with tension. But I saw it, the tremor in his hand, the twitch in his jaw. I leaned forward just slightly and whispered, "Go on." "Open it." He didn't, not yet, because deep down he knew. He'd always known I wasn't the kind of woman you could humiliate without consequence. Not after 30 years of standing in his shadow, building his empire, raising his son, and swallowing his pride as if it were communion. The music tried to recover, but the air in that ballroom was too thick. Guests murmured, cameras flickered, and the bride's smile cracked just a little. My husband raised his glass again, trying to shake off the silence. "To love," he said weakly. I tilted my head. "To truth," I replied, loud enough for the table to hear. He sat down. The color had drained from his face. For the rest of that dinner, I watched him. Every now and then, his hand brushed the envelope as if it were burning through the tablecloth. The mistress, Miss Perfect Nails, kept throwing me sideways glances, trying to figure out why I wasn't falling apart. But that's the thing about women like me. We don't fall apart. We fall silent, and when we rise again, we make it count. When the cake was cut and the dancing began, I excused myself to the hallway. The music echoed behind me, muffled and distant. From the corner of my eye, I saw him follow me, envelope still in hand. His voice, half angry, half afraid, broke the hum of the air conditioning. "What the hell is this?" He hissed. I turned, slow and calm. "It's your new beginning," I said. "Without me." Then I walked away, leaving him in that gold-lit corridor, holding his drink in one hand and his downfall in the other. And for the first time in years, I felt free. Before that wedding, before the smirk and the toast that tore my name in two, there was a time I thought we were unbreakable. 30 years ago, we didn't have chandeliers or champagne. We had cracked walls, second-hand furniture, and dreams that fit inside a shoebox. Back then, he was a man with ambition, and I was the woman who believed in it. I used to work double shifts at the diner while he went to night school for his business degree. I'd bring home leftover pie for him, apple, his favorite, and we'd eat it on the couch while talking about someday. Someday, when we'd own our own home. Someday, when the bills would stop fighting for our attention. Someday, when we'd finally breathe easy, and we did, eventually. He landed a job at a small real estate firm, and I took care of our newborn son, Marcus. Those early years were honest ones, Messy, yes, but full of love, the kind that made burnt dinners taste like feasts. When the first deal came through, he brought me roses, the cheap kind from the gas station, and said, "This is just the beginning." Baby. Funny how the beginning would one day be used against me. The cracks came slowly, like hairlines in a window pane. You don't notice them at first, until one morning you realize the glass has turned to cobwebs. He stopped coming home for dinner, stopped asking how my day was, started dressing better, talking louder, and moving through rooms like he was the only one who mattered. "Work's been crazy," he'd say, loosening his tie, barely looking at me. "Then maybe let me help," I'd offer. Gently he'd laugh. "You wouldn't understand. It's business." That was the start of the shutting out. I remember one night vividly. It was our anniversary, 20 years married. I'd cooked his favorite meal, smothered chicken with collard greens and cornbread, the way his mama taught me. I wore the black dress he once said made me look like the reason God invented temptation. I even lit candles, but he never showed. At midnight, I blew out the candles myself, the wax dripping like tears down their sides. His car pulled in an hour later, and when I asked where he'd been, he kissed my forehead and said, "Just business." Only he smelled like lilac perfume, the kind I'd never worn. From that night, something in me began to change. Slowly, quietly, like a seed sprouting in the dark. Still, I kept up the front. Sunday dinners, PTA meetings, Christmas cards. I became the face of his success, the smiling wife beside the self-made man. People looked at us and saw goals. But inside our house, it was like living with a stranger wearing my husband's skin. He started spending money like joy was something you could buy. Designer suits, new watches, golf trips that lasted weeks. When I questioned him, he'd say, "You're too uptight, baby. Loosen up, we made it all right." He just forgot who "we" was. Then came the first real sign. I was folding laundry one afternoon when a receipt slipped from his jacket pocket. Tiffany & Co., diamond bracelet, $6,000. My birthday had passed. Our anniversary had passed. I wasn't wearing any diamonds. I sat on the edge of the bed, the receipt trembling in my hand. My reflection stared back at me from the vanity mirror. Tired eyes. A woman who'd given up her best years for a man who stopped seeing her. I didn't cry. Not yet. Crying was for when things broke. I wasn't sure what we were anymore. Maybe we were already broken, and I just refused to see it. That night, when he came home, I watched him undress in silence. Watched him hang up his suit, roll up his sleeves, loosen that same smug tie. "You okay?" he asked, noticing I was quiet. "I'm fine," I said, and for once I meant it. Because fine wasn't peace. It was the calm before the storm. He kissed my cheek like always, routine, empty. And I smiled, thinking, "You really think I don't see you, huh?" I'd spent 30 years learning how to read that man, his tone, his posture, the shift in his eyes. And for the first time, I realized I didn't need to ask him anything anymore. The truth was already writing itself in the smallest gestures. I just needed to decide what to do with it. When I went to bed that night, the diamond receipt sat folded beneath my pillow. Like a secret whispering, "Wake up," and I did. The next morning, I opened his laptop while he showered. That's when I saw her name for the first time, hidden in his emails, tucked between work memos and travel itineraries. "Can't wait to see you again, love." Her name was Veronica, his assistant, but back then she was just a shadow in the background, a name that meant nothing, yet, little did I know, that name would one day sit across from me at my son's wedding, smiling like she belonged to the throne I built with my bare hands. And by then, I'd already learned how to smile right back. You ever meet someone, and your spirit knows before your mind does? That was Veronica. She came into my life on a Tuesday afternoon, dressed in cream silk and perfume that lingered like arrogance. My husband introduced her at his office's charity gala. "This is Veronica," he said. "My assistant. She keeps me organized." Organized. That word sat heavy in my mouth like something sour. She extended her hand, smile polished to perfection, nails French-tipped and gleaming. "Mrs. Thompson," she said sweetly, "I've heard so much about you." I took her hand, squeezed a little tighter than polite, and smiled right back. Funny, I haven't heard a thing about you. She laughed, light, fake, practiced, and turned her gaze to my husband as if to say, "Isn't she precious?" But I wasn't precious. I was watchful. For the rest of that evening, I played the role I'd mastered for decades, the quiet wife, the gracious host, the woman people underestimated. I listened more than I spoke, I observed more than I reacted, and what I saw told me everything I needed to know. The way she leaned in too close when she spoke to him. The way he avoided looking at me when I caught them sharing private smiles. The way her lipstick matched the shade that stained his shirt collar 2 nights earlier. Every gesture was a confession. Later that night, as guests clinked glasses and the band played something smooth, I stepped outside for air. The night was thick with humidity and jasmine, and for a moment I let myself breathe. That's when I heard them. Around the corner near the valet station, his voice, low and firm. Hers, breathy and amused. "I told you, not here," he said. "Oh, please," she teased. "She's inside, smiling like she's still your wife." I didn't move, didn't interrupt, just stood in the shadows, my heart slow and cold, listening to the sound of my husband's lies. When they finally parted, I stayed there, eyes fixed on the stars. I remember thinking, I built that man. And now he's building his lies on top of my bones. But see, women like me, we don't explode. We evolve. The next day, I cooked breakfast like nothing happened. Pancakes, eggs, coffee the way he liked it, black with 1 sugar. He sat there scrolling through his phone, half listening as I talked about Marcus's college plans. "I'm meeting Veronica later," he said casually. Like the name meant nothing. I stirred my coffee and smiled. "Oh, your assistant?" He nodded, not noticing the chill in my tone. "Yeah, she's sharp. Real asset to the team." "Mm-hmm," I said, sipping slowly. "I'll bet she is." He didn't catch it. He never did. That weekend, I visited his office under the pretense of dropping off lunch. The receptionist smiled politely, surprised to see me. "Mr. Thompson's in a meeting," she said. "With who?" "Veronica," she replied. Of course. I waited in the hallway. Through the glass wall, I saw them. Him sitting back, relaxed, his hand on her chair, their heads close. Her laugh, bright and intimate. My husband, the man who once couldn't stand being late for Sunday service, now acting like sin was part of the dress code. When he finally saw me, his whole face froze. He stood up so fast his chair nearly toppled. "Sweetheart, what are you doing here?" "Brought you lunch," I said, holding up the bag. "Didn't know you already had company." Veronica's smile faltered, just a flicker, but enough to please me. She stood, smoothing her skirt. "It's nice to see you again, Mrs. Thompson." "Oh, I'm sure it is," I replied. She left soon after, her perfume trailing behind like victory. But she didn't know. This wasn't victory. It was evidence. That night I went into his office at home while he showered. On his desk, a photo of us on our wedding day, tucked behind a folder labeled Accounts. I pulled it out, stared at the younger version of me, the woman who thought love was forever. Then I slipped the photo inside that folder, a reminder, a warning. He walked in, towel over his shoulder, surprised to see me sitting there. "What are you doing?" "Nothing," I said. "Just remembering." "Remembering what?" "What you used to look like when you were proud to have me beside you." He frowned, ready to argue. But I stood up, kissed his cheek and whispered, "Don't worry." "I'm not angry." He smiled, relieved, thinking he'd won. But inside, I was building something. Brick by brick, memory by memory. The kind of quiet rage that doesn't burn. It simmers. Because betrayal doesn't always need noise. Sometimes it just needs time, and I had plenty of that. The next week, Veronica sent me a text. Yes, me. It read, "You're such a strong woman, Mrs. Thompson. I really admire how gracefully you handle things." Gracefully. That word nearly made me laugh. I typed back, "Thank you, dear. I learned from watching The Best Pretenders." No reply. But I knew then, the war had begun, and I wasn't planning to lose. There's a moment in every long marriage when the silence changes shape. It stops being peaceful and starts being punishment. That's what our home turned into, a quiet kind of cruelty. It began with the little things. He'd come home late and pretend not to notice I'd cooked. His good mornings turned into grunts. And whenever we went out together, his hand never found mine anymore. Instead, he'd walk 2 steps ahead, like I was some distant relative he'd agreed to escort out of politeness. People noticed. You can always tell when they notice. Those polite smiles, the quick glances that say, "Poor woman." I wasn't poor. I was married to a man who'd forgotten what loyalty felt like. And I was smart enough to start remembering who I was before him. Still, the world loves a spectacle. And my husband, with his charm and new money, loved to play the leading man. He started hosting dinners, flashy, crowded, all for show, the kind where people wear wealth like armor. I was expected to smile, to nod, to serve as decoration beside him. And I did for a while, until one night he made a joke, a cruel, thoughtless joke about my old-fashioned ways, how I still believed in cooking instead of catering. The table laughed. Veronica laughed the loudest. I looked at her, perfect hair, perfect nails, perfect audacity, and then looked at him. He didn't even realize the sound of that laughter was the sound of something breaking between us for good. Later, when the guests left, he poured himself a drink. "Don't look at me like that," he said. "Like what?" "Like you think I embarrassed you." "I don't think it," I said. "You did," he smirked. "You've lost your sense of humor, baby." That's all. But it wasn't humor. It was humiliation. And I wasn't laughing. Over time, the disrespect spread like rot. He started criticizing everything. How I dressed, how I spoke, even how I laughed. "You sound too loud," he'd say. Too much. Funny. He used to say he loved that laugh. Now it annoyed him because it didn't belong to her. Then came the worst of it, the way he turned our son against me. Marcus had always been close to me. I raised that boy while his father chased deals. I taught him to cook, to pray, to stand up straight and speak truth, even when it hurt. But lately, he'd started pulling away, defending his father, repeating his words. "Mom, you worry too much," he'd say. "Dad's just under pressure." Pressure. That's what they called betrayal now. I could see the manipulation working, slow and steady. My husband was feeding him stories, painting me as unstable, too emotional, stuck in the past. It's a tactic men like him use when they start rebuilding their lives without you. They rewrite history while you're still living it. And the saddest part? It worked. Marcus started visiting less. Calls got shorter. Texts came without emojis. The warmth between us began to fade, replaced by politeness. He'd still hug me, but not all the way. His arms didn't close like they used to. And every time he left, I'd sit in that quiet house, wondering how love could vanish so quietly you almost didn't notice it leaving. One night, while clearing the table, my phone buzzed. An email. No name, just an address I didn't recognize. The subject line read, "You deserve to know the truth." My stomach twisted. I opened it. Inside were 6 photos. My husband and Veronica at a private dinner, his hand resting on hers. Another at a hotel lobby, her head on his shoulder. Another of him holding the same diamond bracelet I'd once found the receipt for. Each image felt like a knife sliding deeper, but it wasn't pain I felt anymore. It was clarity. At the bottom of the message, one line stood out. "She's not who he thinks she is." No signature. No explanation. But something in me clicked. For the first time, I stopped feeling like a victim. Because this wasn't just about heartbreak anymore. It was about deceit. Layers upon layers of it. And whoever sent that message had just handed me the first thread to pull. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't confront him. I just poured myself a glass of wine, sat on the porch, and watched the streetlights flicker across the neighborhood we built together. Somewhere inside that silence, a plan began forming. Not out of rage, but out of purpose. I realized something powerful. When respect dies, love doesn't follow. But pity is what comes next. And I refused to be pitied. It came in a white envelope with gold trim, heavy paper, perfumed faintly with lilies and entitlement. The return address was my son's, Marcus Thompson and Lila Grant. You are cordially invited to celebrate their union. I should have been overjoyed. I'd dreamed of that moment since the day I held him in my arms, but as I ran my finger across the embossed lettering, something snagged in me. Because my name was spelled wrong, Martha, with an extra E, a small thing maybe. But not from my son. Not after all these years of handwritten Mother's Day cards and birthday notes that never missed a letter. And right beneath that misspelled name, in fine print, I noticed something else. Sponsored by V Design and Events. My chest went cold. V stood for Veronica. I stared at that line for a long, trembling moment. That woman, the same woman who once smiled at me across a desk full of stolen glances, was now decorating my son's wedding. I should have seen it coming. But betrayal has a way of hiding in plain sight, dressed up as coincidence. When I called Marcus, his voice was cheerful, rushed. "Mom, you got the invite?" "I did," I said softly. "Looks beautiful," he laughed. "Yeah, Lila's been working with a designer. Veronica something. She's amazing." That name again. So casual, so normalized. My son had no idea he was praising the woman who helped destroy his parents' marriage. "Marcus," I asked carefully, "who introduced her to you?" "Oh, Dad," he said. "She's been helping with his company events, and when we needed a planner, he suggested her. She gave us a big discount. Of course she did. There's always a discount when the price has already been paid in dignity." "I see," I said. "And your father, he'll be giving a toast?" "Yeah," Marcus said, not noticing how quiet I'd gone. "He said he wants to say something meaningful about new beginnings." New beginnings. That phrase again. The one that would haunt me weeks later when he raised his glass and publicly erased me from his life. In the days that followed, the wedding planning took over everything. My husband and Veronica became fixtures in every conversation, though no one said her name outright. People tiptoed around me like I was glass. At church, whispers followed me like perfume. "She's being so strong." Poor thing. Imagine facing that woman at your own son's wedding. Pity, the one thing I promised myself I wouldn't accept. But humiliation has layers. And this was the public kind. The kind that creeps into your reflection until you start to forget the woman staring back. I decided I wouldn't let them see me crack, so I went shopping for a dress. Something elegant, powerful, midnight blue, my color. When I looked in the mirror, I saw her again, the woman I used to be before love made her small. That night, as I hung the dress on my closet door, I caught a faint glimmer of light coming from my husband's office. His briefcase was open, papers scattered. I should have walked away, but curiosity has always been the quiet accomplice of betrayal. Inside, I found a folder labeled Estate Planning. Inside that, his will. I wasn't in it. Not as his wife. Not as his partner. Not even as trustee of the foundation we built together. Everything, our home, our accounts, even shares of the company had been reassigned, and there it was again. Her name, Veronica Daniels, listed as executive partner and beneficiary. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. 30 years of partnership erased with the stroke of a pen. He'd built his empire with my savings, my sacrifices, my faith, and now he'd passed it all to the woman who stole my place at his side. I sat in that office until dawn, surrounded by papers that told me exactly how disposable I was. Then something inside me hardened. Not bitterness, not sadness, something colder, sharper, resolve, because love can end quietly. But betrayal deserves an audience. The next morning, I called the one person my husband never expected me to call, Evelyn Carter, our former attorney. We hadn't spoken in years, not since she left his firm under disagreements. When she picked up, her voice was cautious. "Martha, been a long time." "It has," I said. "And I think we have something in common now." "Oh?" "I believe we've both been burned by the same man." Silence. Then a low chuckle. "I'm listening." That was the moment my plan was born. Not out of revenge, but out of necessity. I wasn't going to confront him yet. I needed proof, leverage, and time. So I smiled to myself and whispered, "Let's talk business." When the wedding invitations went out, everyone saw a proud mother smiling beside her son. No one saw the fire building behind that smile. Because if my husband wanted new beginnings, I was about to give him one he'd never recover from. And it would start with that same envelope. My name misspelled. My role diminished, but my purpose. Finally clear. Rock bottom doesn't announce itself. It just shows up one morning, in your reflection. That's where I found her, standing in my bathroom, staring at me through the mirror like a stranger wearing my skin. Puffy eyes, wrinkles deeper than I remembered. A woman who looked tired of being quiet. For 30 years, I'd made myself small to fit inside his world. I'd built his home, raised his son, fed his ego, softened his temper. Somewhere along the line, I'd stopped existing outside of his orbit. But that morning, I swear to you, something in me woke up. It wasn't rage. Rage is loud and fast. This was colder, smarter, patient, the kind of strength you don't scream about. You become it. I went through my morning routine like muscle memory. Brewed coffee, opened curtains, fed the dog. My husband was already gone, probably at the office, which we both knew meant with her. I sat at the kitchen table, sunlight pouring across a stack of unpaid bills he'd forgotten to handle. Next to them was the invitation, my name still spelled wrong, like an insult printed in gold. That was when the idea started forming. Not revenge, redemption. I wasn't going to throw fits or chase him. That would make me the fool they expected me to be. No, I was going to do what women like me do best, endure, observe, and outsmart. Because when men play chess with your life, you learn to think 5 moves ahead. That afternoon, I drove to a small cafe across town, one of those quiet places where nobody knows your name but they remember your order. Evelyn Carter was already there, sitting by the window with her usual black coffee and that sharp lawyer's stare. "Martha," she said, rising to hug me. "You look tired," I smiled faintly. "You should see the other guy," she laughed, a low, knowing sound. "So," she said, leaning in, "you said on the phone this was about your husband." "It's about my life," I corrected, "and how he thinks it still belongs to him." I slid the folder I'd taken from his office across the table, the will, the property transfers, everything. She flipped through the pages, her eyes narrowing. "Good Lord," she murmured. "He really did this without you knowing?" I nodded. Signed, notarized, hidden. Just like everything else he didn't want me to see. Evelyn tapped her pen thoughtfully. "He's sloppy. You can use this. Especially if he's been moving money under her name." "You said she's tied to his company?" "Yes, Veronica Daniels. Executive partner, according to that will." Evelyn sat back, exhaling. "Then he's more foolish than I thought." "Why?" "Because she's not clean. I've heard her name come up in more than one fraud complaint. She's been under quiet IRS review for a while. If your husband's tied to her, he's standing on quicksand." My pulse quickened. "You can prove that?" "Not yet, but I can find someone who can." I looked out the window, sunlight hitting the side of my face. For the first time in months, I felt something unfamiliar. Hope. That night, I went home and stood in front of the mirror again. This time, I didn't see a victim. I saw a woman reclaiming her reflection. I started taking back little pieces of myself. I threw away the skin-tight dresses he'd once demanded I wear. I packed up his awards, the ones I had helped him earn, and put them in a box labeled Lies. I cleaned out the guest room and turned it into an office. My office, new desk, new lock, new notebooks filled with plans. When he came home later, smelling like her perfume, he noticed the changes right away. "What's all this?" he asked, looking around. "Space," I said simply. "Something I needed." He frowned. "You're acting different." I smiled. "No, I'm acting right." He didn't understand it. Not yet. Men like him never do until it's too late. The days that followed were quiet but purposeful. Evelyn sent updates, discreet, encrypted emails. "Found records," one said. "Veronica has multiple shell companies." Another. "Funds traced offshore. Possibly embezzled." Every message was another brick in the foundation of my plan. At night, I'd sip tea by the window, watching the world go still. I wasn't sleeping much, but I didn't need to. I was running on something stronger than rest, purpose. I stopped questioning whether I was doing the right thing. He'd stolen enough years. It was time I started taking something back. A week before the wedding, I opened my wardrobe and pulled out the midnight blue dress. It shimmered in the light, powerful, dignified, untouchable. And as I looked at it, I whispered to myself, "You've been through worse, Martha. But this time, you're not surviving. You're winning." I placed a small ivory envelope on the vanity beside the dress. Blank, sealed, waiting. The same envelope that soon enough would wipe the smirk off his face. By the time the sun rose that Monday, I already knew what I had to do. No more tears. No more waiting for apologies that would never come. It was time to gather proof. I started in the study, his kingdom of oak, leather, and lies. The room always smelled faintly of bourbon and ego. I'd avoided it for years, partly out of habit, partly because I knew the things inside would change me if I saw them clearly. But now I needed those secrets. And I wasn't afraid of the dark anymore. I began with the filing cabinet, the one he kept locked. He never realized I'd memorized the key code the first week he bought it. Men like him always underestimate the women who dust their trophies. Inside were folders labeled with names I didn't recognize: VD Holdings, Crescent West, Marlin Imports. At first glance, they looked like standard investments, but the numbers told a different story. Large transfers between the company and private accounts. Invoices for consulting that didn't match any real business. And every single payment went to a bank under Veronica Daniels. That woman wasn't just a mistress. She was an embezzler. And my husband, the man who'd built a fortune on my faith, was helping her do it. I took photos of every page. Slow, steady, methodical. When my phone filled up, I used Marcus's old tablet, the one still lying in his childhood room. I uploaded copies to an encrypted drive Evelyn had helped me set up. Each click of the camera felt like reclaiming a piece of my sanity. At noon, I met Evelyn again at her office. She wore her hair up this time, glasses low on her nose, her face set in that expression I used to see when she was about to win a case. "You weren't kidding," she said, flipping through the evidence. "This is enough to bury them both." I leaned forward. "Can you make it airtight?" "Oh, honey," she said, smirking, "I can make it federal." We decided on a sequence. Step 1, send the documents to an IRS contact she trusted. Step 2, prepare notarized copies for legal protection. Step 3, give him one final unforgettable delivery. That envelope I'd been saving, it finally had a purpose. Back home, I sat at the dining table, the same table where I'd once served Thanksgiving dinners and heard him laugh with a woman who wasn't me. Now, it was covered in papers, statements, photos, emails. I thought about all the nights I stayed up waiting for him. All the excuses, all the smiles I forced through clenched teeth. And I realized something powerful. Betrayal isn't about what they do to you. It's about what you stop doing for yourself. That night, I stopped waiting. I printed the key documents, folded them neatly, and slid them into an ivory envelope. On the front, I wrote his name in the same cursive I used to sign our anniversary cards. James Thompson. I sealed it with wax. Red, like blood, like warning. Around midnight, I heard the garage door creak open. He came in smelling of expensive whiskey and someone else's perfume. His tie was loose, his steps uneven. "Still awake?" he asked, surprised. "Just finishing some things," I said, my tone calm, even. He looked at the papers spread across the table. "What's all this?" "Memories," I said. He smirked. "You should let go of the past, Martha." "Oh, I have," I said. "Completely." He shrugged, poured himself a drink, and wandered upstairs without another word. When I heard the shower running, I went to the closet, pulled out my dress for the wedding, and slipped the sealed envelope inside the matching clutch. Then I looked at myself in the mirror one last time. Not to fix my hair, but to see the woman who finally remembered her own power. The next morning, Evelyn called. "The IRS confirmed the data," she said. "If he's involved, they'll find out soon enough." "Good," I replied. "You sure you want to hand him that envelope yourself?" "Oh, I'm sure," I said. "He likes grand gestures. Let's give him one to remember." We hung up, and I sat for a while, listening to the ticking clock on the wall. Every sound felt louder, sharper, alive. For the first time in years, my world wasn't shrinking. It was expanding. I didn't need his love. I didn't even need his apology. I just needed closure. And this time, I was the one writing it. When I finally crawled into bed that night, he was already asleep beside me, snoring softly, peaceful. I watched him for a long moment. This man I'd once prayed for, now just a stranger with my last name. Then I whispered, "You'll never see me coming." And I smiled, because the next time he stood in front of a crowd and said, "To new beginnings," Mine would already be written, in ink, in evidence, and in vengeance, sealed by my own hand. The night before my son's wedding, the house felt unnaturally still, like the world was holding its breath. The dress hung on the door, midnight blue shimmering under lamplight. The clutch sat beside it, envelope sealed and waiting like a secret with a heartbeat. I should have been nervous, or heartbroken, or something, but I wasn't. I was calm. There's a special kind of peace that comes when you've already lost everything someone could take from you. Marcus called around 8 p.m. "Mom," he said, voice warm but cautious. "You'll be there early tomorrow, right?" "I wouldn't miss it," I said. "It's your day," he hesitated. "Dad's been acting weird. Just try to keep things peaceful, okay? Peaceful?" I repeated softly. "Baby, peace is exactly what I'm bringing." He laughed, relieved, not catching the double meaning. He never did. He still thought his mother was soft, gentle, predictable. And maybe that was my greatest weapon. No one ever suspects the woman who made their lunches and kissed their foreheads. But I could hear something else in his tone. Distance. He loved me. But his loyalty had been twisted. His father had seen to that. Years of subtle poison. Your mom doesn't understand. Your mom's always dramatic. Your mom can't move on. Still, he was my boy, and I refused to let his father's sins stain the one pure thing I'd ever made right. At 9, I drove to his new place, a small house he shared with Lila, his fiancée. The neighborhood was quiet, all fairy lights and fresh paint, the kind of suburban calm that hides how fragile love can be. When he opened the door, he looked surprised. "Mom, everything okay?" "Just wanted to see my son before the big day," I said, smiling. He hugged me, and for a moment, I could still feel the little boy who used to press flowers into my hand after school, who'd cry when I left for night shifts. But when he pulled back, I saw traces of his father, the way he glanced at his watch, the way he avoided looking me in the eye too long. Lila joined us, sweet and soft-spoken. "Hi, Mrs. Thompson, would you like some tea?" "Thank you, baby," I said, sitting down at their kitchen table. "You too nervous?" She smiled shyly. "Just excited. Your husband's been helping a lot." My stomach tightened. "I'm sure he has." She went upstairs soon after to finish packing for the hotel, leaving me and Marcus alone. He looked at me with that careful, polite expression children use when they're not sure how to talk to their parents anymore. "Mom," he said, "I know things between you and Dad are complicated, but tomorrow's about family. I just want you both there, smiling. For me." I studied him, the same brown eyes that used to light up when I walked into a room. Now dimmed by confusion, caught between two versions of the truth. "I'll be smiling," I promised. "You have my word." He reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You're the strongest person I know." That almost broke me. Almost, because he didn't know what strength really looked like. Not yet. When I got back home, the house was empty. My husband was working late, which I knew meant he was with her. I didn't care. Not anymore. I poured myself a glass of wine and walked through each room slowly, touching things one last time. The family photos, the souvenirs, the dining chairs we'd chosen together before we could afford real wood. Then I came to the fireplace mantel. On it sat a picture of us on our wedding day, me in lace, him in a borrowed tux, both of us laughing like fools who thought love was enough. I picked up the frame, stared at it for a long while, and whispered, "Tomorrow. I'm ending the story you started." Then I set it face down. Just before bed, I laid everything out like armor. The dress, the heels, the clutch with the envelope tucked neatly inside. Inside that envelope were copies of the documents, the fraud reports, the offshore transfers, the IRS reference number Evelyn had secured, enough to crumble everything he'd built with deceit, and tucked behind those papers was one final note. Written in my own handwriting. "You said new beginnings without me, but you never asked if I'd already begun." Around midnight, the garage door opened. His car, his footsteps, his perfume, that same lilac poison that wasn't mine. He peeked into the room. "You're up late." "I was just thinking," I said, turning off the lamp. "About tomorrow?" "Yes," I whispered. "About everything that's finally ending." He chuckled, thinking I was being sentimental. Don't start drama at the wedding, Martha. Oh, don't worry, I said, rolling onto my side. I don't plan to say a word. He grunted something, undressed, and climbed into bed. Within minutes, he was asleep, snoring softly. I stared into the dark, listening to the rhythm of his breathing, and thought, this man has no idea tomorrow will be the last day he ever feels untouchable. When the clock struck midnight, I smiled to myself, because revenge, when done right, doesn't need fury, it just needs timing, and mine was perfect. Weddings have a way of dressing up betrayal in lace. That morning, as sunlight spilled through my curtains, I told myself to remember that. I took my time getting ready. The navy dress slid over me like armor, elegant, regal, unshakable. My hair was pinned high, silver streaks shining like defiance instead of age. Around my neck, I wore a small gold locket, the one Marcus made in second grade, with a photo of us glued inside. That was all I needed. When I looked in the mirror, I didn't see the woman he'd tried to break. I saw the one he underestimated. The ceremony was beautiful. Too beautiful. Rows of white roses, a string quartet playing something soft and expensive, and the air thick with the smell of polished wood and money. My husband stood in the front row, all smiles and charm. You'd never know that man had spent the night lying beside a woman he'd betrayed for years. Veronica was there, of course, seated strategically close enough to be noticed, but far enough to claim innocence. She wore ivory silk. Ironic, considering the color once symbolized purity. Marcus looked radiant, nervous, proud. Lila, sweet, kind Lila, glowed like a woman who believed in forever. I almost envied her. Almost. When he walked me down the aisle to my seat, his hand shook just a little. You okay, Mom? I'm perfect, I said, and meant it, because while everyone else was celebrating beginnings, I was preparing endings. The vows were short, heartfelt, the kind that make you forget how cruel the world can be. I almost cried watching my son promise love, honesty, and devotion, all the things his father once said to me. But tears wouldn't change the past. They'd only blur my view of what was coming. When the ceremony ended, guests clapped and cameras flashed. The crowd moved to the reception hall. Golden chandeliers, champagne towers, and a live band playing jazz. Every detail screamed perfection, right down to the monogrammed napkins. M&L, forever begins here. And in the center of it all, my husband basked in attention like a man who'd won something. He greeted guests, laughed loudly, made toasts about family and faith. If hypocrisy had a scent, it was the cologne he wore. Veronica circled near him, a shadow with painted lips, pretending to chat with other guests while her eyes never left his. When she caught mine, she smiled that smug little smile, the same one from his office years ago. I smiled back, slow and deliberate. I wanted her to see the calm, the control, the knowing, because she had no idea she was about to lose more than her illusion. At dinner, I was seated across from her, and diagonally from him. Perfect symmetry for a perfect storm. The waiters poured champagne, the music softened, and guests leaned in for the speeches. Marcus spoke first, his voice shaking with love. To my parents, he said, "Thank you for teaching me what commitment means." I almost laughed. His father lifted his glass, pretending that sentence didn't burn like acid. Then came my husband's turn. He stood, tall and proud, his glass raised high. "To new beginnings," he said, pausing to scan the room. "To family, to love, and to the future." The crowd murmured approval, lifted their glasses. Then he smirked and said it. To new beginnings. Without her. The words sliced through the room. For a moment, no one breathed. You could feel the silence, heavy, confused, ashamed. Even Marcus froze, his eyes darting between us. Across the table, Veronica smiled. The kind of smile that says, "This is my victory." I just looked at my husband, my expression soft, almost maternal. And then I reached into my clutch. The ivory envelope slid across the linen tablecloth. Quiet, clean, deadly. He blinked, confused. "What's this?" he whispered. "Your new beginning," I said simply. He laughed awkwardly, trying to maintain the performance. "Oh, come on, Martha." "Open it," I interrupted. Voice calm but sharp enough to cut the air. Cameras flashed, forks stilled. He tore the flap open, and I watched as his confidence drained word by word, page by page. Inside were the bank statements, the transfers, the forged invoices. And on top, the letter from the IRS, the one Evelyn had helped prepare. His face turned pale. The hand holding the paper began to shake. Across the table, Veronica leaned over to glance at the contents. The moment she saw her own name on those documents, tied to accounts she thought no one knew about, her smile collapsed like glass. For once, she had no words, and neither did he. The silence stretched long and deep before someone at another table finally whispered, "What's happening?" My husband cleared his throat, fumbling for control. "Excuse me, everyone, I need a moment." But there was no saving that moment, not from the cameras, not from the guests who'd seen enough to guess the truth, and not from me, the woman he thought would never fight back. He stumbled away from the table, envelope clutched in his hand, face pale and damp. Veronica followed, whispering frantically. Marcus stood, confused and embarrassed. I remained seated, calm, composed. Then I raised my glass. "To love," I said softly, "and to truth." Several guests hesitated, then lifted their glasses with me, and for the first time in years, when I drank, it wasn't to swallow pain, it was to savor victory. When I tell you that silence can roar louder than thunder, believe me. Because that ballroom, that glittering hall full of perfect strangers and polished lies, went so still. You could hear the ice melting in people's glasses. James, my husband, stood there, envelope trembling in his hands, his face drained of the easy charm he'd worn for decades like cologne. The man who prided himself on control suddenly looked small, and it was beautiful. He flipped through the papers again, eyes darting wildly between numbers, names, and signatures. All his. All undeniable. His breath came short, shallow. Veronica leaned in, whispering frantically, "What is this?" Her voice was too sharp, too panicked, drawing even more attention. "James?" She hissed again, grabbing the papers. "What the hell is this?" But when her eyes hit that first page, offshore transfers, Daniels Holdings, 2022-2024, I watched the color leave her face. Her manicured hand began to tremble, the same hand that used to wave at me across dinners like I was beneath her. Now she looked like someone staring down her own obituary. Across the room, Marcus froze mid-step, confusion etched into his face. "Dad, what's going on?" James didn't answer. He couldn't, because the next sheet, the IRS letter, spelled it all out. The investigation, the accounts under his company's name, the date of audit confirmation, scheduled for the following Monday. The whispering started then, a ripple of gasps and murmurs spreading like wildfire. A few guests pretended to check their phones, pretending not to see. Others didn't bother. Phones were already snapping photos. The king had fallen, and the court was watching. I stayed seated, sipping my champagne, calm, composed, centered, after all. It wasn't me under that light. It was him. He turned to me then, eyes wild, jaw clenched. "What did you do?" He hissed. "What you taught me," I said softly. "Handled business. You've ruined me." I tilted my head. "No, James, you did that all on your own. I just brought a mirror." He stepped closer, lowering his voice but not his fury. "You think this makes you better than me?" "No," I said, standing slowly. "It just makes me free." And God, that word tasted sweet. Veronica snatched the papers from his hand, skimming faster and faster. "You said these accounts were clean. You told me they were in your wife's name." His head snapped toward her. "Don't you dare!" "Oh, I dare!" she spat. "You dragged me into this mess." Their argument grew loud enough to stop the band. Mid-song, gasps, stares, cameras, every secret they'd ever buried together was now clawing its way into the light. It was almost poetic. The liar exposed by his own lies, the mistress stripped of her illusions, and the wife he'd dismissed sitting there like a queen at her coronation. Marcus rushed forward, his voice breaking. "Dad, what is happening?" James tried to speak, but the words came out twisted. "Nothing, son. Just a misunderstanding." I set my glass down. That's what he called his marriage, too. Marcus looked between us, realization dawning. Mom. You knew? I did, I said quietly. And I needed you to see who he really is. His shoulders slumped. The kind of heartbreak that doesn't come from one betrayal, but a lifetime of believing a lie. He didn't say another word. He just walked out. And in that moment, I saw my husband flinch, not from shame, but from fear, because the one person he thought he'd keep didn't even look back. Security appeared soon after, polite but firm. The manager whispered that someone had called the police. It wasn't me, but I didn't stop them either. James tried to smooth things over, his voice wobbling with desperation. It's just a family misunderstanding. But when the officers walked in, holding a warrant addressed to Thompson and Daniels Properties, LLC, I saw his knees almost give. Evelyn had done her job well. He shot me one last look. Hatred. Disbelief, regret, all tangled in one collapsing man. You'll regret this, he spat. I smiled. I already did. For 30 years. And then they took him away. Veronica didn't follow. She just stood there, frozen in her designer heels, mascara bleeding down her cheeks. When she finally spoke, her voice was small. You planned this? Carefully, I said. That's what women like me do when we've been ignored too long. She tried to speak again, but words failed her. All that confidence, all that cruelty, gone. I walked past her, slow and deliberate, heels echoing across the marble floor. Guests parted like water, whispering my name as I passed. I didn't look at any of them. I didn't need their pity or their praise. I'd gotten what I came for, the truth exposed. The lies burned down and my dignity intact. Outside, the evening air was cool, sharp, cleansing. The string lights shimmered overhead, and for the first time in years, I could breathe without feeling someone else's shadow over me. The sound of distant police sirens faded into the night. I closed my eyes and whispered, to love and to truth. Then I smiled, because the woman who walked into that wedding wasn't leaving as a wife. She was leaving as a storm that had finally passed. The next morning, the world woke up different. Not for everyone. The sun still rose, people still drank their coffee. But for James Thompson, the world had come undone. News travels fast in small circles of money and pride. By breakfast, local headlines were already running it. Real estate tycoon under federal investigation for fraud and embezzlement. And just beneath it, a photo from the wedding. Him pale, clutching that ivory envelope like it was radioactive. I didn't have to say a word. The truth had a voice of its own now. He called that afternoon. Blocked number. I knew it was him by the silence that came before he spoke. Martha, he said, voice cracked and unfamiliar, you didn't have to do this. Didn't I? I asked quietly. He sighed, long and shaky. They froze the accounts. The firm's gone. Veronica's hiding. Stop, I said. You built your kingdom out of lies and other people's sacrifices. You burned your own house down, James. I just brought the matches you dropped. He tried one more time. Please. We can talk. I hung up, because some conversations deserve silence. The days that followed were a blur of reporters, subpoenas, and whispers. Evelyn handled most of it. She kept me informed, meticulous and efficient. They're seizing assets, she said. Investigators found enough to put him away for a long time. I didn't ask for details. I didn't need them. I'd already seen the story's ending. Now I was just watching the credits roll. Veronica tried to reach me too, through email, through mutual friends, even by showing up once at my gate in sunglasses in desperation. Please, she said through the intercom, voice trembling. I didn't know he was married when it started. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I pressed the button. Oh, I believe you didn't mean for it to end this way. Then I turned off the speaker. A week later, she was gone. Moved out of state, rumor said. Left with debts and lawsuits in her wake. The kind of poetic justice you don't even have to write yourself. But the part that broke me and healed me all at once was Marcus. He came by the next Sunday, unannounced. I found him on the porch, hands in his pockets, eyes tired. Can I come in? Always, I said. We sat at the kitchen table, the same one where I used to pack his lunches, the same one where his father once mocked my cooking. He looked at me a long time before speaking. I didn't want to believe it. Not at first. I know. I thought you were angry, bitter, trying to ruin him. I was angry, I said, but not bitter. Just tired of pretending I hadn't already been ruined. He nodded, tears welling up. I saw the footage, Mom. The way you sat there while it all burned down. You didn't even flinch, I smiled faintly. When you spend 30 years learning to survive humiliation, watching the truth rise doesn't hurt. It heals, he took my hand. I'm proud of you. Those 4 words, after all the silence, all the years of being dismissed, all the loneliness, hit harder than any revenge could. And when he hugged me, I finally let myself cry. Not for James, not for what we'd lost, but for the woman I'd finally become. The following week, I packed a few boxes. I didn't want the house anymore. It was full of ghosts, echoes of laughter that had turned into warning signs. I sold it quietly, took what little remained of my own savings, and found a small place on the other side of town, near the water, where mornings smelled like salt and second chances. I bought a used coffee machine, painted the kitchen walls yellow, and planted roses out front, red ones, wild ones, unpruned and unapologetic. When Evelyn stopped by one day, she laughed. You know, she said, you could open this place up. A little cafe. People would love it, I smiled. Maybe I will. Because that's the thing about starting over. It doesn't always roar. Sometimes it hums softly over the sound of coffee brewing and peace settling in your bones. The last time I saw James was at a distance, outside the courthouse. He looked smaller, older, the arrogance gone. Reporters swarmed him like vultures, shouting questions he couldn't answer. For a moment, I thought he might see me standing across the street. But he didn't. And even if he had, I don't think he would have recognized me. Because I wasn't his wife anymore. I was the woman he'd built his downfall upon. That night, I stood on my porch, wind sweeping through the trees, and whispered a quiet prayer, not for him, but for me. Thank you for the strength to walk through the fire and not become it. Then I went inside, poured myself a cup of tea and smiled, because the war was over. And for the first time in my life, I'd won without losing my soul. Freedom doesn't arrive with fanfare. It comes quietly, like morning light slipping past curtains, touching everything that survived the night. That's how it felt waking up in my new home. The little house by the water wasn't much. 2 bedrooms, creaky floors, a leaky faucet that sang at midnight. But it was mine. No marble countertops, no grand foyer, just sunlight, coffee, and peace. Some mornings, I'd sit on the porch with a blanket around my shoulders, watching gulls drift across the bay. The air smelled like salt and redemption. I'd sip my coffee and think, so this is what it feels like to breathe without asking permission. I named the place Rose and Light Cafe, a nod to my grandmother, who used to say, even wilted roses can bloom again, if you give them sun. I hired 2 young girls from the neighborhood to help. They called me Miss Martha and said I made the best sweet tea this side of Savannah. Maybe I did. Maybe peace just made everything taste better. People started coming in. Construction workers, teachers, church ladies, the lonely and the curious. They didn't know my story. They didn't recognize my name from the headlines. They just came for warmth, and I gave it freely. Every time someone smiled after that first sip of coffee, it felt like a little piece of my old self had come home. One day, a woman about my age sat by the window reading the paper. She looked up, squinting. You look familiar, she said. I get that a lot, I smiled. She nodded toward the headline. Thompson, sentenced to 8 years in federal custody. Were you related? I wiped the counter. Once, I said. But not anymore. She didn't press. She just smiled, as if she understood that sometimes survival means rewriting your name. Marcus visits often now, sometimes with Lila, sometimes alone. They bring my grandbaby, a soft little girl with curls that smell like powder and giggles that could heal any wound. Grandma, she said one afternoon, tugging my sleeve. Mommy said you used to be sad. Are you happy now? I looked at her. This tiny miracle, this proof that life goes on. I wasn't sad, baby, I said, smiling. I was just learning how to start over. Because that's the truth no one tells you. Starting over isn't about forgetting. It's about forgiving yourself for staying too long in someone else's story. Sometimes I still get calls from old acquaintances. "Martha, how do you feel after everything?" I tell them, "Free." They always pause, waiting for me to elaborate. But there's nothing more to say. Freedom doesn't need explanation. It just is. Every once in a while, though, I see his name, in an article, in a passing conversation. James Thompson. I don't feel hatred anymore. If anything, I feel gratitude. He gave me 30 years of lessons I never asked for, and the chance to reclaim every piece of myself he tried to bury. Without him, I wouldn't know the strength that lives in silence, and I wouldn't know how good freedom tastes when you've earned it, sip by sip. On the anniversary of that wedding, 1 year later, I closed the cafe early. The sunset painted the bay in gold and violet. I stood outside, barefoot in the grass, the breeze lifting my curls. I raised a glass of sweet tea to the horizon and whispered, "To new beginnings." And for the first time, those words didn't sting. They healed, because when he said them, they were a goodbye. But when I said them, they were a promise that I would never again live small. A promise that no matter how cruel the ending, I'd always find my way to the light. Then I smiled, turned off the porch light, and went inside, not as someone's wife or someone's victim, but as the woman who finally wrote her own last chapter.